Domenic.
Hey, Jenna.
It's another week.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, seriously. Can I just tell you how wild this past weekend was? Because I think we even said in the last episode that I was like, I would not be at all surprised if like more news broke. And sure enough, on Sunday, boom.
What happened, Jenna? I don't know what you're talking about.
Did
Did
something
anything
happen?
happen? Did
I feel
something
like a thing
happen?
happened. Yeah. So Joseph Robinette Biden decided to step down out of the presidential campaign out of from the race for the Democratic nomination, even though he pretty much had it locked up. And in stepped Kamala Harris. And that has unleashed a lot. And I think that you and I can look at her, and I think a lot of people are starting to look at her campaign, at least the
Hmm.
the initial reaction, from a very specific lens, our favorite lens. So let's start the show and get into it. Hi, I'm Jenna,
And I'm Dom, and we're both award-winning journalists.
who've recently been laid off.
Our industry is experiencing a seismic shift, and it's shed a lot of really good journalists.
So where does that leave us? Well, we're definitely laid off.
And we're looking for new jobs, looking for what's left of the industry, and what to do next.
And we're looking at all of it. So if you're a fellow laid off journalist, a working journalist, or someone who admires the craft, we're looking to build community.
Develop new skills, and try to figure out what just happened.
Welcome to Laid Off and Looking. Okay, so where were you when you first heard?
That's a good question. I'm gonna look. I think I was home. I think I got that message from you
Oh,
when I
well, I
was
mean,
sitting on the
technically
couch
we
over
are
here.
unemployed, so being
Yeah.
home is kind of baked
When
in.
I'm looking, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was from you. And I was just sitting here watching probably, oh, yes, I was watching Love Island USA.
Oh, that's
But yeah,
right. The
yes,
disassociation show,
yes.
necessary in an insane news cycle.
So yes, so I believe it was through you that I first heard that story. But yeah, how about you? Where were you?
Well, I was also home. No, actually, no, wait, hold on, wait. Because I'm like, no, I wasn't home, but I'm like, no, that was the week before's catastrophic time-changing breaking news. This week's breaking news, I was home and I was so I had gotten word from some people who worked, some friends who worked at some of the bigger news shops, and they were just like, well, we're putting together a plan because we're pretty sure this is going to happen on Sunday. And I remember thinking, hmm, okay, Sunday's very specific. And I heard it from one person. I didn't really think that much of it. I heard it from a second person, and I was like, okay, wait a second, there's something to this. And, then Friday happened, Saturday happened, and
Hmm.
Saturday, all of the Biden surrogates were coming out and being like, no, we're going to be in Detroit on Tuesday. Like, we're in it, we're doing this. So I was like, oh, well, I guess, maybe it's like sometimes you
Hmm.
hear things, but, situations change. So I was like, all right, I guess not. And I think I was like potting plants or something. Like, I'd completely moved on. And then a friend of mine who's she watches a little too much cable news, which I can't believe I'm
Yes.
saying this as a journalist, but there is such a thing as watching too much cable news. And she's like, Jenna, in a text message. And then I looked, and that's how I found out. And I was like, oh, I guess it was Sunday.
Yeah, I was waiting for it to sort of happen at that point too. I remember seeing Axios last week and they were saying it was going to happen this week. And I know some people were wondering if it was going to happen after a meeting with Netanyahu that was happening this week, but I
Mm.
mean the timing it was there's a lot of frustration of course from people feeling this should have happened sooner, but at the same point also grateful that I think a lot of people were just like something happened. So
Oh, something happened because it's not just that uh Biden stepped down and then Harris
mhm,
stepped in.
mhm.
We'll get into my name distinction in a minute, but the reaction via, I guess, like it might have started through social media, but then it sort of like exploded everywhere else. Um, Hence my shirt, because it seems like, I mean, there were reactions,
Chartreuse.
but then so Chartreuse, I guess, is now, and this is not an endorsement t-shirt. This is just a reflection of the giant news story that exploded, which seems to be driven completely by um social media and our favorite topic, pop culture. So first of all, because you know this better than I do, I just knew that suddenly I was seeing like, neon lime green everywhere. And I was like, wait, what happened? Dom, where did that come from?
It comes from Charlie XCX,
Who
pop
is,
singer who's a pop singer.
okay.
She's been around since 2012. And the thing is, her latest album is called Brat, and it's a banger, has a lot of great hits on it. It's a dance album. It's fun. It's very introspective. But part of the thing too is it created this kind of sensibility that it's Brat Girl Summer, and it's talking about, kind of being badass, basically. Charlie has her own description of what being a brat is. Um, but I think basically it comes down to being badass. And I know she was the first one on Sunday to declare that Kamala is brat. And with the color of the album cover, which album cover, I forget whatever the cover art, it's just brat in lowercase on a chartreuse background. Um, and that's what a lot of people have been using on social. And it just set off for Kamala. And seriously, like it was so exciting to sort of see people on get excited about,
Yes. Well,
how
it was
to
nice to
communicate their
see.
support for
Yes.
her.
Yes. Because it had gotten quite just depressed in general, I think. Um, just people either wanting to completely disengage from politics, presidential politics, just not feeling, I guess, any sort of passion, sort of resigned to one thing or another. So the energy was really, really nice to see come back. I will say I just looked it up because I'm also old. And okay, and old isn't necessarily, I shouldn't say I'm old. I should say that I am just not as tuned in to some parts of pop culture as I used to be. So, according to the internets, Brat is the message behind the album is symbolizes living unapologetically, having fun, and refusing to conform to the status quo. So for me, I absolutely love that theme. And I mean, I had this tank top and I have several pieces in this chartreusey color anyway, because when you are a deeper chocolatey skinned woman, bright colors tend to work really well on you to begin with. So I have a lot of chartreuse, turns out. But I now know I love that it's now tied to like I am having like an unapologetic, powerful, like this is how my summer's gonna go. And that I absolutely am on board for.
I yeah, I think that it's
John's like, yeah.
no, no, but even going back to the whole energy shift, with Joe, I'm doing the opposite. I'm going by all their first names. You'll go by the last names. But
Well,
like
yeah, there's
Joe,
okay.
but for me, Joe had just not um he just the energy, obviously different candidate. The energy is just different for him. You didn't have that same excitement. And I really do think, like, obviously with Kamala, you have this completely different type of uh there is more of a sense of somebody who's connecting to a different generation.
Well, I will
And
say it's definitely a different voice.
it is, and it's really I think it's really interesting to sort of see how quickly it shifted, because it went from people seeming really disengaged
Mm-hmm.
to all of a sudden um, really being engaged by a candidate. And of course, this is the beginning. Things are going to go, you know what I mean? There's a lot of work
Yes.
to do for their, as opposed to Don, who is on his little
Well, I like
thumb.
that you are keeping true to
Hmm.
your adherence to being equal to all the candidates, but there has been a
Hmm.
conversation that at least I've seen online, and that is in regards to first names versus last names. And
Hmm.
this is another one of those like patriarchal things that you don't
Hmm.
realize until somebody points it out. So for in general, for male politicians, they almost exclusively get referred to by their last name. Like it's Biden, it's Trump, it was Clinton, it was Bush, It's oh God, Reagan. At one point somebody was joking when there was talk of Joe, as you say, but Biden
Hmm.
dropping out, that somebody was like, somebody's going to reach out to Jimmy Carter from the DNC and be like, "Hey, you want a job again?" Anyway, so but all of the men get referred to by their
Hmm.
last name, which I guess is a sign of respect, whereas women, and there's only been a few, but it's Hillary and
Hmm.
now Kamala. And people are saying, wait a second, no, give them the same respect that you give the
Hmm.
men. So again, if you're going to refer to people by their first name, then everybody gets referred to by their first name. If you're going to refer to the dudes by their last name, then give uh Vice President Harris her due respect and
Hmm.
refer to her by her last name. So that was another one of the things. So here's where I find this so fascinating, because this is a political story that exploded into the news cycle almost as a pop culture story. Because even what you were talking about with Charlie SEX, and there were numerous stories that I was seeing this week where seasoned journalists on like CNN and MSNBC were having to be like, okay, so I talked to my intern or associate producer, and apparently there's somebody named Charlie SEX. I
XCX.
okay, X. Okay,
XCXC.
see, I
Yeah.
got it wrong. I would be that person. And then they were also like, and then there's an album and it's called Brat, and what does Brat mean? And this, that, and the third, and like calling neon green chartreuse and all this stuff. It's, I guess to me, what I found so interesting about it is that often pop culture gets sort of, not sort of, it does, it gets maligned as silly and flighty and not really important, but it is 100% driven by politics. It's either in reaction to or in support of. And in a lot of ways, on a unconscious level or conscious sometimes, because we all make conscious choices, kind of drives how we live our lives and what are the things that are, you know, not only important to us, but how we make choices going forward. Like,
Mhm.
for example, it was another big story when apparently Beyonce gave her blessing to Vice President Harris to use her song Freedom from her Lemonade album as her campaign theme song. And then it became a whole thing about the Bayhive and and Beyonce's fans. And again, this is now we're talking pop culture, but like the significance of having that fan base, that fervent fan base behind Vice President Harris and how that could help propel her to. So
It's
was
not,
there stuff that you were saying?
one thing too, also, like I think um working whenever I was booking guests, or even when we were working on the show or when I worked in news, I was always used to using the title of the person, meaning
Mm-hmm.
like if you refer to anybody, it was always, even if they were somebody who left office out of respect, you always use their full title,
Mm-hmm.
meaning like you would say Vice President Harris, you would say, you know, Secretary Clinton, like you just
Mayor
use that.
Giuliani. He's still Mr. Mayor. Don't make
He also
faces.
sells coffee. He also sells coffee now. If you want to go buy some coffee by Rudy, sure. But and I feel like part of that reason why it's been really fun for me in a way to not be in that space right now is
Mm-hmm.
because I can also respond to people as a citizen and not only as a journalist, seeing it only from that perspective.
Oh.
So it's kind of freeing to be able to say that. Because oftentimes before it was always, like I said, you were so, even outside of it, I would have been too nervous. I always would feel like gotta refer to them by their titles. But of course, I respect the titles of the people who have been in office. Well, most of them. Um, but but I think that as a citizen, like I also feel like what part of this is the accessibility, and I think that's kind of what pop culture has really done, has made people accessible, and I think that Kamala has really embraced this right now, and we're
Uh-huh.
seeing this, and I think it's because she sees the generation that she's attracting. If you decide I want to be this type of leader,
Uh-huh.
and that's fine, but look at the difference in terms of how she's connecting to a different generation. Pop culture, listen, when the first debate aired, you had Nixon and Kennedy, and they always, as we know, right? on television, the people who watched it, they felt Kennedy won the debate. The people who listen on radio felt Nixon won the debate.
Yep.
Same thing here. So you have people who now are being brought into this space who were not excited through the through Joe's campaign. You know, it's a lot of reasons why. It isn't just, I don't think it's just because of his age. There are a lot of reasons why, but he there are a lot of things he wasn't capable of doing that Kamala is. And I think she's going to embrace that. And that's smart because guess what? You want this generation to see you as somebody they can relate to and someone who cares about what they want and what they want to, you know, what you want to accomplish. And I think it's really, this is how you get a message. I mean, pop culture is a way to connect to your audience in a very, um, it's like a very just like common humanistic way. It's not I'm here and you're down here. I'm the president, and therefore you not being a political leader means that I don't really care what happens. And I think people want to feel their leaders care about them. They want to feel like we're the same. I know obviously you've worked really hard to get where you are, and I respect that. But at the same point, we're all human and we all deserve that same kind of respect too. And I love how pop culture and social media has really made it much more accessible for different generations too, who might have felt really like disenfranchised or feel like that nobody's trying to connect to them.
Yeah.
Um, and it's sort of different.
Or
And
speaking their language or speaking to them. I will
or
say that like Joe, now I'm doing
mhm,
it. You've infected me. That Joe seemed to have been um playing from a political playbook that was just no longer the case anymore.
nope.
And so it just added to like what seemed like an old and antiquated and out of
Yep.
touch feeling. But like even when you were talking about how, like Kamala is able to connect to people, I would also say pop culture because of the role that it can play in our lives. Like I can't remember there's a name for it, but the way that you can hear a song that maybe you
Hmm.
hadn't heard in a long time and it like takes you back to a moment in time. I can't remember there's a name for that psychological effect. But the point is her campaign her campaign's use of or embrace, I should say, because I don't know how much they've used it, but they have definitely embraced pop culture aspects of her that like what is it, vote.org or something, or the voter website where people can go to, one of the places where people go to register. The news story was that after uh Vice President Harris came out and got all of this like support from social media, and it seemed like a lot of Gen Z was behind her, there was a huge influx in voter registration of people like 35 and under. And then what made it the news story was that it was a bigger increase than when Taylor Swift posted something during the 2016 election cycle. And so again, you see like this like celebrity culture stuff leaching into the body politic.
Hmm.
I would say that it's probably always been there because again, even
It's
going
always
back to the resignation, well, not resignation, but the like, can you please step down, Mr. President
down already.
conversation. One of the big stories was that, and I guess he's a big donor also, but George Clooney had penned this op-ed for, I think, the New York Times, basically saying, listen, Mr. President is a done data. You need to drop out. And again, it's like because part of having that, including pop culture, which in a lot of ways is not in a lot of ways, it is youth culture. Like what was pop culture from like 30 years ago is no longer pop culture now. You know what I mean?
It's evolved, but I do think the access that we all have to the same platforms has really changed the fact that
Oh,
you
it's
have
totally
an
changed
older
it.
generation who is also just as plugged in. Some, not everybody is, of course, it might be less, but there are more people. Like I guess for me, I'm not going to say that I'm the most plugged in because I'm not, but I do stay aware. I've always been that because I
Mm-hmm.
enjoy being current. Like I just like paying attention to what's happening currently. And I also something I did want to say also is just I think pop culture gets a bad rap, especially when you're
Oh,
talking
it
about how
totally
journalists
does.
cover it.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes it's covered as an aside, it's covered as a joke. Yet it isn't. Again, I go back to it's all a way of how we communicate to one another, especially intergenerationally, and
Mm-hmm.
what's going on. You don't listen, I'm not going to say certain things that somebody who is Gen Z or even younger would say because it would look like I'm being, cringy and being trying to be act a certain way. I'm not going to do that, but I am aware of what's going on, and
Mm-hmm.
some of it I like and I can appreciate. Um, and some of it you also see how it works in telling a story. They're helping to change how this election is going. It's very, I mean, you look back, um, even other generations in terms of presidents and people running for office, this is very different. The landscape is so different. You didn't have TikTok. You didn't have the instantaneous way of communicating. We had it, but not the same way we do now, not the way people connect now. And this generation is creating content that it's like it looks crisp, it's catchy, and it changes the discussion. And I'm so fascinated to see how this is going to impact the race. Because right now, of course, there's a momentum going into this. And I do wonder um, how Don is, you know, seeing how this is all going for himself as Donald is, because this is something that he has to shift to in terms of how he does it. But again, going back to how
Well, he
journalists,
had been able to because, to be perfectly honest, he was, obviously being a reality TV star.
Mhm.
Um, he was never, a traditional politician. That's one of the things that a lot of people were drawn to him over because he wasn't a traditional politician like, your Hillarys or your Joes. But at the same time, yeah, like he was, I don't know, I mean, I think for a lot of people still he's entertaining, and that seems to be outweighing, like, do I care about his policy positions? Like, sometimes people will say yes or no, but what we end up hearing over and over and over again is that people are making, electoral choices based on a gut feeling at the end of the day, and a lot of that gut feeling is going to be like, do I feel like I like you or not?
I've been saying this for a long time, and I know we discussed there was a book that came out this summer um, by Variety. I believe it's a Variety editor and reporter and adventures apprentice in Wonderland, how Donald Trump and Mark Burnett took America through the looking glass. And he interviewed Donald a number of times.
Hmm.
And he said he's the first reality show president.
Yeah.
And the reason it's like when I watch Housewives or I watch any of the reality shows, Vanderpump Rules, Love Island USA, all these shows, right? The thing that you learn about a good reality show um, uh, personality is their ability also to react to anything that's going on around them. They are never caught off guard. They
Mm.
always have a comeback. They even when they're surprised, they have to be prepared for anything that's about to happen. Like you have to be quick on your feet and you have to know your audience. And I think that's what Donald is not the traditional
But
uh
he's so good at that.
but he's been so good at that since the 80s. I mean, he's been doing this. He's never had to really like he's always been about self-promotion and to kind of go with what's popular. Like in a way, he's used pop culture through the years to remain relevant and to also speak to an audience, especially now. That's where I think this is going to be interesting because now you have a candidate who I think kind of relates more to the a younger generation and can excite a different generation. And I'm really curious to see how this all plays out because again, pop culture deserves its props.
Oh, it
It's
totally
been
does.
it can change so many things. It can change the world, and that's something that I think is going to be really interesting
I
to
think
see over
we've
the coming
seen
months.
numerous instances where it has changed the world. I do want to bring up one other pop culture, or God, I don't actually, wow. I'm now having a hard time differentiating between the two, and that is the coconut tree. So that became something that was memeified over and over again. People were putting coconuts in
Hmm.
their social media handles, etc. And that came apparently from an anecdote that
Hmm?
Vice President Harris shared at, I don't know, she was doing a speech or something like that. But basically, it was her mom saying to her daughters, like when they were kids, do you guys think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist. And the full quote is, you exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you. And which, by the way, that feels like just alone feels like that's going to become one of those quotable presidential things that goes on in history because it is so appropriate and so very true. But I got that little thing that I just like read right now. I got that from NPR.
Hmm.
Like, again, what was happening? Like, just this energy, this groundswell of energy that's happening on social media, which is now the way that we communicate. That's now largely where pop culture lives, is what like traditional news outlets are having to report on. Like, we did, even in our former show, there were more than a few instances where we had people on who were basically had built large platforms for themselves on social media to talk about, whatever specific issue that their platform is dedicated to. Or I'm seeing it now also on other forms of traditional or mainstream media, whatever you want to call it, where, yeah, people are starting to draw from the conversations, or they have been drawing from the conversations that are happening um, online.
And as they should have been for a long time. I think that goes back to journalism having to adapt to the times. And I think there was a period where those types of stories felt like they were not worthy of being put out there. And
Because it's
that's not,
silly. Who are
it's
these
silly.
people?
Who
Yeah.
cares? Oh, that doesn't matter. It doesn't have any impact on my life. Yeah, it does. Because it's changing how we see the world. It's changing our content and how
Mm-hmm.
what we're consuming. Look who's like, you know what I mean? Like that's you always want to respect the new what's developing in the world, whether it's technology, how the innovations that are happening, and even the pop culture trends, because some of them will stick around or some of them are good for that moment. And yeah, some of them don't listen. Some of them could end up being not the best look. When you look back on them years later, you're like, oof, what were
Is
we
there anyone
thinking?
that comes to mind for you with that like years later you're
Uh,
like, oh my God?
I'm trying to think. Nothing's coming to mind at this moment because I wasn't really thinking, but if it comes to mind, I'll let you know. I don't know if you have any that are popping
Oh
up
my
in your
God.
head.
Well, okay, so as a grown woman now, circa now 2024, looking back on a lot of the pop culture that I consumed in my formative years as a teenager in the 90s, when it comes to like, oh my God, especially gender roles, wow,
Oh, that's
man.
yeah.
Girls my age consumed a lot of toxic nonsense.
Oh,
It's now like there's a whole movement with some women online, um where I think it might have started with deconstructing Christianity for kids who were raised in more fundamentalist households, and now it's sort of like a conversation around decentering men from women's lives. And again, it's one of those things where just like, wow, here
well,
too, I've been
well,
making decisions based on.
well, you know what? This wasn't a trend, but it was something I remember happening when Britney Spears turned 18. There was like I remember there was this big discussion like, oh, she's finally legal. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember being like, mind you, I had to have been in my 30s at that point. I was like, oh wow. Like that's pervy. Like why are grown ass men in their my age and older talking about an 18-year-old woman as if she's now also oof, now she's legal. Like
They
that
do that with
was
the Olsen twins too. They've done that with so many
yes. And
girls.
yes.
Girls. They most recently did that with, oh my God. Okay, wait. I Stranger Things.
Oh,
L
L 11.
11. Whatever the
Yes.
actress's real name. They did that
Um
with her too. This
yes.
was very recent. Which,
Yeah,
by
they
the
do
way, I know
this.
you're making a point, but I would just like to bring that back to pop culture
Yeah.
becoming part of the body politic,
Yeah.
because so people being interested in this child turning of legal age of consent for creepy sexual needs of sad, lonely grown men. Okay, so That then got tied into a beef between, which was the other big summer story, the beef between Drake and Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick being like, Drake, you have accusing Kendrick of being interested in, let's say, not legal
Oh,
uh
you
young women.
accusing Drake of not being
Yes,
right.
Kendrick was accusing Drake of that. Okay.
Right.
Amongst several other things. I'm
Yes.
really boiling it down here. But the point is that so then
A
the beef goes back
minor.
as well. Exactly. And then They Not Like Us, the song comes out, the
Yes.
video comes out, and now They Not Like Us is also being remixed as part of the Harris campaign. Because again, it's like it's it's pure, that is 100%, that rap beef is 100% a pop culture story, and it is now part of the body politic because that is something that people are using to bolster Vice
Yeah.
President Harris over former President Trump.
Yeah. What I'm about to say here isn't necessarily tied to pop culture, but I do, just because you mentioned earlier about changing times when we're talking about how certain things were certain seemed to be acceptable at a certain point. There were certain trends that happened and then they shifted. And you, one thing that I was listening to the podcast The Daily, and they talked about um how looking at the way Joe and Kamala talk about abortion and how
Mm.
Joe felt very uncomfortable. You could tell. I mean, just in this bit, he rarely ever said the word abortion. Joe
Mm-hmm.
would always, he, and they looked at, there were a lot of different things. And, Kamala, when she was giving her speech, she was basically, she used the word abortion. She talked about body autonomy for women. And I think that, that's the thing is like they were discussing how for Biden, you're talking about an 81-year-old Catholic, Roman Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh, cisgender man who basically had a very conservative, even if he believes in it and the idea of choice, like for him, he used the words like pro-choice or
Mm-hmm.
reproductive rights, but he didn't want to use the word abortion. And I think this is again a sign of how the culture is changing. You have generations not afraid to use certain words because of what the patriarchy was telling people before, like this is not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't, this is not how our culture should be talking about you. And it's like, I'm gonna curse here because I have to.
Okay.
Fuck you. It's like fuck you. Fuck you for telling us how we should, you know what I mean? It's just, so I appreciate
Thank you for
how
the
that
disclaimer,
has
Dom.
a that's that you I appreciate the evolution. I appreciate how again, how we're changing. And that all has to do with pop culture in the sense of the society starts realizing. And yes, I know sometimes people say there's bad stuff too. Yes, well, hello, welcome to the world we live in. There's good and bad. But, not feeling shame over certain things, of being able to talk about, like you were saying before, about the first names, how there will be female candidates who are referred to by their first name and sort of put in a box of like sister, mother. And then you have
Mhm.
men who are, you're the leader. And it's like, no, we've got to change the way that that's what I'm hoping we see as this moves on. Pop culture, again, just sort of has this way of forcing that change, even if we don't want you. It's like, better go along with it at some point.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, that's, words that have entered our lexicon. Haterism, cancel culture,
Yeah.
all of that stuff. Well, even though even though in a lot of ways some of it has been maligned or misused, um, or I wouldn't say cancel culture because I feel like cancel culture wasn't, but the word cancel to be
Hmm.
canceled. So anyway, stuff like that has, yeah, it's been misused and abused, and like people have attempted to rebrand it. But yeah, that's
But
very much a thing.
I really would appreciate more of journalists, again, who don't feel that they have to look down on pop culture or the way they act sometimes, because I feel that's why
Yes.
people can not necessarily trust journalists, or they feel like they don't understand who they don't understand
It
the public
creates
anymore.
an unnecessary distance in my mind
When you
because
start
you
saying,
can have, yeah.
when you start saying, oh, so we are now going to talk about what is brat? What is a brat? It's like, and everybody on the panel is saying the same shit. And you want to be like, seriously, all, well, like, I'm a, you can be in touch. Like you do need voices out there who are in touch and who get it and who don't feel like you have to explain everything to them. You feel like they're not connecting. And we have to somehow change that too as journalists. Just like we have to adapt in certain technology in terms of technology and how we
Hmm.
I think we also have to learn how to adapt. How do we speak to the audience that we're speaking to?
Absolutely. Well, I would say I would like to believe that in the future that a fully staffed newsroom, and I'm choosing to believe that that will happen again in the future, that will also, you'll have your environmental reporter and your education reporter and your political reporter. And yes, you can have your pop culture reporter.
Hmm.
That is part of the conversation. Instead of somebody having to sort of like swoop in like Jane Goodall to be like, well,
Yes.
this is what the 18-year-old natives are talking about. Like, yeah, it should I really don't think it should be that way because again, it just adds to the distance. It's creates like a invisible wall almost.
Arts and culture are so important to our everyday life. Why would it be any less when we're talking about news also? Like I'm not saying every story, it has a place in
No,
there. And
I
therefore,
100% believe
so we
that.
just have to learn how to give it that respect. And also, I think letting people know that we're on top of it, and not everybody has to feel like they have to start from scratch and be like, so, oh, let's try to figure this out. Um, because I think you lose out on a lot of people who are not going to hear that message because they feel like nobody's talking to them.
Well, I think what you were saying about the strengths of a good reality show contestant or reality show
Hmm.
host or whatever you want to call it,
Hmm.
um, I think that might be one of the things that people perhaps who are doing political reporting and eschew reality TV is beneath them are totally missing.
Hmm.
That yeah, there
Definitely.
there is value in understanding the inner workings of Vanderpump Rules.
Yeah. knowing knowing how again how you have to be someone it ties into how careers change and we all have to learn different things. Same
Yeah,
thing with politics. Talk about journalism, same thing with politics. Like you have to evolve with the world that you're living in, and that means being quick.
yeah.
And I think that's what we were missing, but that's what a lot of people felt like they were missing in this what was happening up till this past Sunday. um People felt like you didn't have I don't know what was going on, to tell you the truth. I think that was the problem. A lot of people just didn't they weren't hearing anything. Nothing was connecting to them. They weren't getting a message.
It was an
And now I
outdated
feel like
playbook.
now I'm not saying we this is just the beginning,
Yeah.
but there is that excitement of and I'm curious to see how it all plays out. And I'm curious to see how the media deals with
That's
it
what,
too.
yes, that's what I am also very curious to see is how the media does deal with it. And is there a reverting to the traditional political reporting or not? Or, do we continue with conversations in the manner that your audience is actually having them? That I don't know. Well, I
So
think
wait and
on
see.
that note,
Yes.
I'm going to take some time and absorb some more pop culture before I dive back into the real news. But Dominic, it is always a pleasure.
Same here, Jenna.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Laid Off and Looking is an independent podcast conceived of and created by Jenna Flanagan and Dominic Kemia. Music provided by Jay Cowett, research by Lori Ruthenbucker. Reach out to us anytime at laidofandlookingpod@gmail.com. New episodes drop every Friday at noon.